Okay, this lecture is going to cover Stephen Gardiner's article, The Real Tragedy of the Commons, which is a response to Hardin's piece, The Tragedy of the Commons, as the title indicates. So basically, here's an overview. Gardiner's going to criticize Hardin's view on the overpopulation and the tragedy of the commons. He agrees instead with Sen and points out the evidence that as development increases, population tends to decrease. But development brings its own problems, mainly increased environmental impact. So as development increases, environmental impact increases as well. And that, according to Gardner, is the real tragedy of the commons. So before we get to Gardner's argument, it's worth looking at Hardin's analysis. So recall that the human population has been growing rapidly in recent history, reaching its first billion in 1804, its second billion in 1927, its third in 1960, fourth in 74, fifth in 87, and sixth in 99. This indicates that population growth is a serious concern, given the limited resources of our planet. We just have only so much drinkable water and land and oxygen and all that. Of course, population growth is slowing down, but the absolute increase itself is still likely to have a severe impact on the planet in terms of demands of food, water, and energy. So even though the rate of population growth is going down, the population is still growing, okay? Just like, suppose you get a raise every year. Well, suppose the rate of increase of salary decreases every year. So suppose the first year is 50%, then it's 49%, then 48%. It's still true that you're still getting an increase in income every year. It's just how the percentage is going down. Well, that's the same. Well, there's still an absolute increase, and that is the troubling part, because even if our rate's decreasing, it's growing. Okay, and again, there's only so much resources. All right. Well, Hardin has some dramatic proposals. First, the population problem has a special structure, what Hardin calls a commons problem, and this structure itself generates tragedy. For left to their own devices, according to Hardin, people tend to have very large families. Okay, people just want to reproduce. All right, it's just what we want to do. If all you global ethics students are just left to your own devices, you just want to repopulate the planet, clone yourselves. Right? That's what Hardin thinks. All right. Second, this problem is caused by and affects primarily developing nations. So it's not as much of a problem, in the affluent Western world, but it's a problem in developing nations. Third, the only available solutions are severe. One, you must deny reproductive freedom and instead coerce people into not reproducing. Two, according to Hardin, you must refuse aid to poor countries during crises. All right. Yeah, those are pretty harsh. Well, Hardin thinks that the Earth naturally provides a corrective to overpopulation with, natural disasters, basically like earthquakes as well as famines. And human interference is the problem, because it's basically disrupting what a natural mechanism. So the Earth is kind of like a self-stabilizing system when you leave it alone. All right. If we naive, idealistic Westerners stop meddling with the third world, then, Mother Nature will take care of the overpopulation problem, Yeah, we'll have too many people, but then a famine will happen and a lot of people will starve, or a major earthquake or tsunami will wipe them out. So it's self-stabilizing, according to Hardin. And yeah, this is a pretty harsh picture, by the way. So as a rational being, then, so this leads to the tragedy of the commons. By the way, Gardiner disagrees with this picture, by the way. And don't assume just because I'm presenting Hardin's case that I am endorsing Hardin's views. I acknowledge that this is a very harsh picture as well, and it's up in the air whether or not it's true. And as we see, Gardner's got some pretty impressive arguments that it's false. All right. So, Hardin being known for, it's worth looking at what the tragedy of the commons is, as Hardin's known for that phrase and that concept, that theory. So, As a rational being, suppose there's a group of herdsmen and a bunch of land that we want basically livestock to graze on, all right? So it's a sheeping analogy. So I quote, as a rational being, each herdsman seeks to maximize his gain. We want to explicitly or implicitly, more or less consciously, he asks, what is the utility to me of adding one more animal to my herd? Well, this utility has one negative and one positive component. The positive component is a function of the increment of one animal. Since the herdsman receives all the proceeds from the sale of the additional animal, the positive utility is +1. The negative component is a function of the additional overgrazing created by one more animal. Since, however, the effects of overgrazing are shared by all the herdsmen, the negative utility for any particular decision-making herdsman is only a fraction of -1. Well, adding together the component partial utilities, the rational herdsman concludes that the only sensible course for him to pursue is to add another animal to his herd, and another, and so on. But this is the conclusion reached by each and every rational herdsman sharing a commons. Therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination toward which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. Freedom in the commons brings ruin to all. Conclusion: freedom sucks. Well, this leaves Gardiner to conclude that the tragedy of the commons is a multi-person prisoner's dilemma. All right? Let me explain what a prisoner's dilemma is. Take two prisoners who are about to stand trial for a crime they are accused of committing together. Each, and in fact they did, each faces the following proposition. So it's kind of like a plea bargain. He can either confess or not confess. If both prisoners confess, then they each get 5 years. If neither prisoner confesses, then each gets 1 year on a lesser charge. If one confesses and the other does not, the confessor goes free and the non-confessor gets 10 years. And here's the stipulation: no one knows what the other will do. Well, what would most people do in this situation? Well, PD1 says it's the collectively rational thing to do is to cooperate. Each agent prefers the outcome produced by everyone cooperating over the outcome produced by no one cooperating. On the other hand, though, it's individually rational not to cooperate. When each individual has the power to decide whether or not she will cooperate, each person rationally prefers not to cooperate, whatever the others do. This leads to the problem, or the dilemma. The situation as it stands drives people by an inexorable process toward a situation that is worse by their own lights and away from a situation that is better. Well, the same values that make cooperation preferable drive individuals away from it. So prisoners want less jail time, which is why they collectively prefer cooperation, but it's also why they individually prefer non-cooperation. Individually, you want the other guy to not confess while you confess so you can get off free. Collectively, it's better for both to not confess or to both confess. So that's the dilemma. It's a dilemma between collective and individual rationality. Well, this leads back to the population problem. Assuming that the population problem is a prisoner's dilemma, Hardin suggests that coercion is used to prevent people from reproducing and that affluent nations should withhold aid. Harsh. According to Gardiner, however, and I wonder if a lot of you probably have the same moral intuitions about this, there is a strong moral presumption against these proposals. Rich countries would end up letting poor folks die, while the rich can actually help at very little cost to them. So this is what Hardin is proposing. That's pretty harsh. And we have like a strong prima facie moral intuition that says that's wrong. Well, the good news is Gardiner proposes 3 alternatives to Hardin's proposal. So, 1, we could just change people's motives. So, for example, no one likes styrofoam these days, or, no one, people look down on, not bringing your own bags to the grocery store.
How are you? Good, thanks. Oh, I forgot my bag for the groceries, so I'll take a paper bag.
You forgot your bag?
Oh, yeah.
You don't have it?
No, I don't have my bag with me.
We don't have any bags.
You don't have any paper bags?
Are you okay? I think this happened before.
We have a man. We have a man who, I guess he forgot his bag. If you can, we can have someone come down. I usually.
Hi.
Hi.
What seems to be the problem?
Well, I forgot my grocery bag.
Well, I'll tell her. He forgot his bag.
I just forgot it. You don't have a paper bag?
No.
We don't.
I was over at my buddy's house, and I didn't have a chance to go to my house to get the bag first.
It doesn't matter what you're doing. When I wake up in the morning, my eyes don't forget to open, my heart doesn't forget to beat.
Yeah, I don't get in my car and forget the car and drive down the street, like running down the street, going like this, and then park it, and then put it in park, and then lock the door.
Yeah, these don't make sense.
Portlandia. All new episodes Fridays at 10, only on IFC.
Or we could appeal to broad considerations of self-interest. For example, we could arrange it so that the prisoners will know that they will meet again in bargaining situations in the future. A third thing is we could just appeal to a sense of fair play. We could set up a society in which people are rebuked and socially shunned when they do not cooperate. And again, this is Gardner's proposal, to which I ask, hey Gardner, that sounds coercive. That's some food for thought right there. Regardless, let's just move on though. So Hardin thinks that the population problem is a prisoner's dilemma. For appeals to fairness, according to Hardin, are ineffective, and appeals to self-interest. Kids are costly, so, just have less of them. They don't work because self-interest is just tied to having kids. It's deeply ingrained in us.
You have something you want to say to me about the baby?
No?
Okay.
Oh my god, Ryan, babies are so cute and I want one right this instant.
Yeah, babies are cute. You know what's not cute? The fact that Kelly forgets to take her birth control pills on purpose.
Okay, so the population, recall, it can be understood as a prisoner's dilemma. And it'd be formulated a little bit differently. So population PD1 says it's collectively rational to have smaller families. Each agent prefers the outcome produced by everyone having smaller families over the outcome produced by everyone having larger families. But on the other hand, population PD2 says it's individually rational to have a large family. When each individual has the power to decide whether or not she will have a large or small family, each person rationally prefers to have a large family, no matter what everyone else does. Well, there's some problems with this. Mainly, population PD2 that says it's individually rational to have a large family is empirically false, both in terms of content and form. We'll just look at the content. With respect to the content, take a look at Western Europe, which is growing slower than its replacement level. And generally, global fertility on the whole is down right now. So it's just not been true. People just individually don't tend to prefer that. It's also independently implausible. What makes it my interest to have a large family? Whatever anyone else does. And that's the key point. Whatever anyone else does. Because generally, under moderately favorable conditions, people tend to prefer replacement or just close to it, regardless of what others do, as opposed to having as many kids as possible. Again, this is what people do in favorable conditions, which just suggests that PD2 is false. Well, so that's the argument that the tragedy of the commons about the overpopulation problem is not the problem. But there's a negative, there's some bad news though. This is the bad news. The total environmental impact. So as development increases, population decreases, but the problem is as development increases, there's environmental implications that are not good. So there is one aspect then in which Hardin's account is close to the truth. The environmental impact people have on the so-called carrying capacity of the Earth. The important variable here is environmental impact per person, not the total human population. And the problem is that the price of a decrease in the absolute number of people is development, but development as currently understood in practice requires a lot of energy consumption, which increases environmental impact. which leads to an intergenerational issue. And this is the real dilemma. So let me just phrase the issue and then we'll look at it as a dilemma. So current generations have powerful self-interested reasons to carry on practices that are harmful to future generations, such as pollution, while future generations have powerful self-interested reasons for wanting the current generation to stop. All right? Worse, future generations have nothing to offer the current generation as an incentive to stop, nor do future generations have the power to make the current generation stop. So future generations are kind of screwed. They have nothing to offer us, just like we have nothing to offer the ancients for whatever they did. So, as such, we have every reason to believe that the commons will be harmed by the present generation. For the same problem above applies to every later generation. At some point, a future generation will be a present generation with no incentive to stop practices that will be harmful to generations that are future to them. This leads to the intergeneration dilemma. Intergeneration 1. It is collectively rational for most generations to cooperate. Almost every generation prefers the outcome produced by everyone restricting pollution over the outcome produced by everyone polluting. Intergenerational dilemma point 2. It is individually rational for all generations not to cooperate. When each generation has the power to decide whether or not it will overpollute, each generation rationally prefers to overpollute, whatever the others do. So we could trash the earth, but the bad effects of it won't ever impact us. It'll impact people 100 years from now. We won't see it. We'll be dead by then. Why not trash the planet and have fun, right? That's kind of the idea. But it's more worrisome than that. Literally, no one in the future can offer us an incentive to stop. And they're powerless to make us stop. They have nothing to offer us. We would have to do it purely out of altruism. Well, this structure is worse than a prisoner's dilemma in two ways. It's not even a prisoner's dilemma, it's worse. One, intergenerational one is worse than a prisoner's dilemma one because it is not true that everyone prefers cooperation. The present generation does not. Second, intergenerational 2 is worse than PD2 because the reason for it is deeper. In the prisoner's dilemma, PD2 arises because there is in fact no way for each prisoner or herdsman to ensure that the behaviors of others is beneficial so long as his is beneficial. But intergenerational 2 arises because it is impossible in principle for one generation to ensure that the behavior of others is beneficial so long as theirs is beneficial. Dun dun.